Nick Xenos is the Executive Director of the Centre of Greening Government and the Secretariat of the Treasury Board of Canada. The Centre is working with departments and agencies in Canada towards a low-carbon, sustainable, and climate-resilient government with a goal to reduce emissions by 40% by 2050.
Nick is joining us from Ottawa today to talk about the carbon budget and the role his sector of the government plays in order for us to move towards a more climate-resilient future.
Hello, my name is Hannah. I'm in grade 10 at TA Blakelock.
And I'm Aishwarya. I'm also in grade 10 at White Oak Secondary School.
And we are the youth stakeholders for Generation Green 2021.
So thank you so much, Nick, for being here with us today. We're really looking forward to discussing how the Government of Canada plans to transition toward net zero emissions and become climate resilient in the future.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So we have a couple of questions for you. And the first is, what is your role on the Treasury Board?
So I'm the Executive Director of the Centre for Greening Government, which is with the federal government. Our job is to green the Government of Canada's operations. Essentially, we're looking to lower the carbon footprint of our operations and be a climate resilient government. So just like you would look at your carbon, any individual would look at their carbon footprint and say, how can I reduce my emissions in my everyday life? We do that for the Government of Canada, but the Government of Canada, of course, has thousands of buildings and thousands of vehicles and airplanes and ships, and we buy a lot of stuff. So how do we look at lowering the footprint of all that?
That's really interesting. Thank you. So our next question that we have for you is, what is some of the work you have done within your numerous roles to contribute to Canada's climate resiliency and mitigation efforts?
So the Government of Canada developed something called the Greening Government Strategy. And in it, we have put in commitments on how we want to lower our emissions from our buildings, from our fleet, so our vehicles, and from what we buy. And also how our operations overall are going to be resilient to a changing climate. And so in there's specific commitments, like for example, every new building the Government of Canada wants to build, we want it to be zero carbon. And 75% of the vehicles we buy that there's green options, we want them to be green vehicles. So hybrids or electric vehicles. Those are examples.
Fantastic. We were just wondering what the carbon budget is and how it works.
So the Government of Canada has an overall target. We want to be net zero by 2050. And so, for example, we've measured the emissions from all our buildings, our fleet, and our procurement. And so what we want to do now is get that carbon to zero. And we have 30 years to do it. And we've committed to reduce the emissions from our buildings and our fleet by 40% by 2025. So we post that on the internet, how much our emissions are from all of these things. And then now we want to reduce that emissions, and so a carbon budget, often organizations kind of look at how much carbon they have, how much they want to, year by year, or how much they have to decrease it. And then they consider that the carbon budget.
That's amazing. Thank you. So the next question that I have for you is, now, Canada has put a big budget on the fossil fuel industry. So what's the current plan to invest in green energy and renewables?
So overall, the Government of Canada has a climate change plan that they released just before Christmas on how to get to our net zero target by 2050. So I'll speak specifically to our government operations. So part of the plan overall is to look at buildings across Canada, vehicles across Canada, and industrial, Canadian industry, et cetera. And then part of the plan is to look at the Government of Canada's emissions itself. And so, for example, in the Government of Canada's emissions on our own buildings, we're doing all kinds of things like buying clean electricity. So we're investing in renewable power in areas of the country where it's a high emission electricity grid. We're buying clean electricity, or we're buying clean technology, smart buildings technology that we're outfitting our buildings with, for example. So, for example, a building doesn't need to heat itself all the time at the same temperature, right? Like when there's less people overnight, you can lower the thermostat, and then you save a lot of energy and emissions. Same thing if you can electrify certain buildings. So you go from fossil fuel based emissions high kind of heating system to a low emissions heating system. And so we're adopting all that. So one example is one office building we installed geothermal ground heat pumps to take heat out of the earth and then heat the building. So lots of examples like that of things we're doing. Electric vehicles, don't use gasoline. So lots of examples of things. We've got a couple electric tractors that we bought for one of the agricultural research centers out west. So again, testing out a lot of new clean technologies and a lot of things that are low emission.
Sounds great. Our next question was kind of a two-part question. Have you seen a reduction in GHG emissions since this carbon budget was implemented? And then do you think that the carbon budget is useful for other groups like school boards and businesses?
So to the first part, yes. So the government of Canada has reduced its emissions by almost 35% since 2005 on its buildings and its fleet, its light duty fleet. So if you look at those two categories, for example, we've reduced our emissions by 35% by buying clean electricity, by energy efficiency retrofits and renovations in our buildings, buying electric vehicles and things like that. Would all organizations would benefit from, and I encourage all organizations to set a net zero carbon target, and then to look. So like we have, you set the net zero carbon target because that's based on the good science that's being done by scientists saying we have to keep the planet well below 2 degrees of global warming. And then the first step for your organization is to look at, okay, where are my emissions? So do I own buildings? Do I drive things? And what do I buy? And then how can I reduce the emissions from that? And then how can my operations be resilient to a changing climate as well? Extreme weather events, permafrost thaw, sea level rise, all that kind of stuff, and look at your organization. Set your target, and then and then measure your emissions, and then what your budget is in terms of how many emissions you're supposed to cut every year to get to your 2050 target or better.
Amazing, thank you. That was really, really informative. So our next question is, what is one tool that you think drives climate action?
So knowledge is really, really, really important. Like you got to know where your actions are that emit the most, and then reduce that. So for example, we all buy stuff, and and there's emissions in making the stuff we buy. So all of us need better information so that we know when we try and choose two products, what's the lower emission products, right? So if we buy apples from the local orchard, then it's only driven 2 kilometers to get to us. If we buy apples from around the world, across the world, then it's going to take a lot of emissions to transport it to us, right? And so the more information we have and the more knowledge we have, the better decisions we can make.
Oh, good. Thank you for that. And then we wanted to ask, what is the most challenging part of your job? And also, what is one thing you love about your job?
So the most challenging part of my job, well, the good part of my job is, I get up every morning and I'm trying to do my part, and my team is trying to do its part to help address climate change. So that's I think a great part of the job, and I work with great people, so that's a lot of fun. The challenging part of my job is that there are some really difficult decisions that need to happen, right, to do this, right? Like to change your vehicle from a gas vehicle to an electric vehicle, people need to make a decision. They need to decide, okay, yeah, I'm going to pay more up front, but then I'm going to save a lot more money because I won't have to spend money on gas for 10 years, right? Same thing for a building. You're going to pay a little bit more to make it zero carbon at the front end, but then you're going to save a lot of money on energy efficiency. And so giving that information to people are at different levels of knowledge in terms of taking action on climate change. And so finding real solutions to the real problems they have, because nobody gets up in the morning saying, I want to create climate change, I want to trash the planet. Nobody gets up saying that. So you got to help them get there.
Amazing. So our next question is also kind of just directed at you and a personal one. But what is your advice for young people to take climate action?
So my advice is to read a lot and really understand and get more knowledge on what you can do. Because I think everybody can take action and everybody can do a lot. And so it's really understanding, okay, what does it mean, right? Like it's raising the awareness, but then the next step is then, okay, so what are concrete actions we all can take? We all live somewhere and it's heated and electrified somehow. And so our actions can control how much of the heat and how much electricity and cooling and where we get those things. We all find a way to get around and we can all decide what's the lowest carbon way to get around. We all buy stuff in our life. And so how many times do we ask the question, when you buy stuff, I want to buy the low carbon thing. I want to buy the thing that's better for the environment. And then what does that mean, right? When you decide, okay, I do want to do that. And so when you're at the grocery store or you're at the store and you're trying to decide, what does it mean? And so we can all take action and we should own it. So it's not just convincing other people to take action, but we need to be the action we want others to take. So we can't buy the peaches from the other end of the planet and then tell people to do something else. We can't be driving in a high emitting vehicle and then ask other people to take action. So we have to show leadership in our own day-to-day life, and every single person could do that.
Great, thank you for that. We also wanted to know how will the Treasury Board of Canada be involved with Bill C-12? So, do you have knowledge on that?
Yeah, so Bill C-12 says that Canada will set targets every 5 years and aim for net zero carbon, right? And so part of that is that we'll set targets and report on how we're doing in many different areas, including in the Government of Canada's operations. And so Treasury Board Secretariat is the department who's in charge of us managing our own buildings. We set policy for managing our own buildings and for managing our own fleet and setting our procurement policy, which is our policy on buying stuff. And so that's where we sit. And so we have to report every 5 years on how we're doing in terms of our emissions, what's our target, and how do we reduce that. And if we ask Canadians to reduce their emissions, then of course the Government of Canada should do it in its own operations. And that's our aim.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Now, I just have one more question based on what you said. So you did ask young people, to attain knowledge and take action upon themselves, right? So, and what is your advice for young people to take systemic action? Because it's obviously individual action is a huge part of climate change and we need to do what we can, but we need to be able to also take systemic action as well. So what can we do?
So everything you're part of, you should ask, right? So if you're your school board, ask the school board, what are they doing to get to net zero and to be resilient to a changing climate? You're amongst you and your friends and your organizations. Okay, so what are we individually doing to be zero carbon, right? Express your opinion to your elected officials. That's what they're there for, right? They want to hear from you what your thoughts are and your opinions. And so feel free to reach out to them. Reach out to talk to your parents about it, talk to your family about it, talk to your friends about it. What can we all do? How do we all get involved? So any of your organizations, any organization you're involved in, everything you do as an individual, it's important. And then of course, your schools, your organizations, who you work for. If you as a client you're gonna go to a store and you're about to buy something, ask them about it. Say, what are they doing to get to net zero? Ask them about their policy and what are they doing. And then when you make decisions on what you buy and where you buy, let it influence you, because you buy as some very knowledgeable person, I forget who it was, but you buy the future you want. Always look at how do you reduce the environmental footprint of what you buy, right? So.
Awesome, thank you. Hannah, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I do actually. With all of your experience and everything, what do you think is going to be the hardest thing for Canada to transition to get those net zero emissions? Is there one sector or one sort of thing that's going to be hardest for us to accomplish?
Yeah. So if you think of kind of buildings, transportation, and industrial stuff you buy, which includes industry stuff and food, right? So let's just focus kind of on those four areas, for example. So on buildings, the hardest thing is heating, because we tend to heat our buildings with a high fossil fuels, high emitting fossil fuels. So we need to think about how do we make our buildings more energy efficient, and we change out the heating system to electrification or heat pumps or those kinds of things. Those aren't cheap, so but it pays for itself over the life of the equipment. So it's making those decisions on housing. It's on vehicles. It's thinking about transportation, right? How do you get around? How to use public transit, active transportation, cars if you need to, but then how do you buy hybrid or electric, right? And then what you buy, the hardest parts of the biggest kind of emitting sectors are things like cement, steel, industrial type stuff that take a lot of carbon. And those sectors are looking to lower their emissions, and they're thinking of how can they get to zero carbon. But things like fuel, cement, steel, plastics, those are very high emitting carbon areas. And so those are areas that suppliers are looking at what are the opportunities to lower their emissions. But you as a consumer too can decide, what do you want to buy? And you can help drive that change in those areas.
Amazing. Thank you. I just have one more question. So you talked about knowledge a lot, and personally, I think climate education is extremely, extremely important. So how can we make sure that we're pushing for climate education that's not just very like facts-based and scientific-based, but also very intersectional and includes climate justice and includes the intersectionalities of social and racial justice within climate change across Canadian school boards?
Yeah, I think, when you look at the impacts of climate change, then the impacts are really stratified in terms of some of the most vulnerable populations are seeing the most impacts of climate change, right? Not just locally, but also globally, right? So, flooding, if it's extreme weather, if it's sea level rise, et cetera, then it's affecting a lot of the poor and most vulnerable populations around the world. Food security, water security, all those issues are hitting some of the most vulnerable populations of the planet. And so you want to, it's very clear that climate change is affecting those populations. Heat island effect, right? Like in cities, if you go to a well-off suburb, then there's a big tree canopy and people have shade, and so the heat island effect is less impactful than if you're maybe in a downtown urban core in a poorer area with less tree cover, less parks, etc. If you're low income, you probably don't have air conditioning. You might not have air conditioning, it is likely, right? And so not only do you have less tree cover and canopy, but you also have less air conditioning. And so you're more at risk of heat island effect, and you have less kind of access to places. So climate change is definitely affecting more vulnerable populations. And so how do you, combating climate change will directly impact the health of Canadians. One of the biggest impacts on health is heat stroke and extreme heat. So it goes hand in hand. It goes hand in hand. Like you have to, the education and the social justice component of different income strata and racialized, gender, et cetera, can all be looked at and as a lens to look at the impacts of climate change and what action needs to happen and what do people in different areas need to do and what kind of action they need to take.
Amazing, thank you. I think there's one last question. And I just wanted to know if you had any different advice for youth when dealing with different members of community of all different ages, and how to really communicate the message of climate change and how to really spark, oh goodness, what's the word? Just getting people excited for, all that is to come and, creating justice within their own communities.
Yeah, I think, there's two things with climate change. Sometimes people think it's a future thing and they think, oh, it's not today, it's going to be tomorrow. But actually, the planet is already warmed by 1.7 degrees, and Canada is warmed by almost 1 degree already. Sorry, the reverse. The world has already warmed by 1 degree, and we want to keep it below 2. And Canada is warming at almost double the global average. So Canada is already warmed by about 1.7 degrees. And the north of Canada has warmed triple the global average. So it's already here. It's happening. And so one of the first messages that awareness and education will help is that climate change is with us. Like, we're seeing it now, right? We're seeing the impacts of extreme weather, flooding, extreme rain, permafrost thaw in the north, ticks. When we go into the woods for a hike, already we're watching for ticks. It's already in southern Canada. Gila Island effect, all that stuff is already here with us. And so we need to take action now before it gets worse. The second part of your question was?
Oh, just advice to youth to really spark change.
Right. Is just communicating that to people, because so part of it is we think it's a future thing, but it's not. It's here now. The second thing is sometimes people think, food security or water security or sea level rise for islands in the Pacific or whatever, that's not us. But if you look at, just experiences we've had in Canada already, we're actually feeling it right now, whether it's, extreme rain, flooding in Toronto, whether it's permafrost thaw in the north, whether it's ticks in the woods when we go for walks, all that stuff is local, right? Here in Ottawa, we have the emerald ash borer has forced us to cut down a lot of our trees. We've had floods on the Ottawa River, which you can see behind me. So we're seeing those impacts already, and it's happening now, and it's impacting our infrastructure, it's impacting our health. So this is a local issue. It's not something far away, and it's not something that's 30 years in the future. This is now, and it's local, right? So depending on where you are across the country, your actions might be different. And then the buying is a thing that youth really control. Like, you decide what you're going to buy. You may not be able to convince your parents to put in a heat pump, although you should bring that up. And it's not sexy. I know nobody talks about heat pumps, but it, if you don't want to worry about the heating, you can lower the temperature. You can wear a sweater. You can do energy efficiency stuff to heat less and pay less. You can not put on the air conditioner at 18 degrees.
Yeah. Or get a programmable one or something like
that.
Yeah,
get a programmable one. But even that, if your air conditioner uses electricity, at least you're better off than if you're using natural gas. So don't have a natural gas, oven, those kinds of things, and use an electric one. So but these are all things that we never get to that part of the conversation with youth and stuff. So anyway, I'll leave it with you guys, but lots of good stuff to do, lots of areas but if you want to go to the next step, it's that kind of education about civics that will really help people, because people are thirsty for action. They just, they kind of get up and they're interested, and then they're like, okay, but what do I do?
Thank you so much, Nick. I think that was it for now because our time is almost up. So thank you so much for being here today. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to share with us your role, your thoughts, and just talking to us about the carbon budget and everything that we asked.
Well, good luck, and hope everybody takes action. So good to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Once again, Nick, for joining us today. We hope everyone watching has learned a thing or two and is excited to take action.
If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or get in touch with us at hcc@haltonenvironet.ca. Join us for the project launch tomorrow to learn about how to get involved, and stay tuned for more talks just like this during spring break.